So I'm going to share these, and I'd like you to talk through maybe I'll share one and have you just give a little more detail around each one of them if that works for you. But there were 4 really big takeaways that I had from that we implemented into our business. Is that good if I just share one of these and then have you? Okay. So the first one you said, and I think I'll tell you what we did is we were very thoughtful in how we were going to spend money. We did a hiring freeze. We froze like salary adjustments, and we were very honest and candid with our employees about why we were doing it. Now, coming out of it, I think there's going to be some things we can adjust that will be good. But the first big takeaway I had was you said current expenses consume future oxygen. So would you talk about kind of what that means and what a business owner needs to be thinking about there?
So there's only one way to go broke, and that is to run out of cash. You can have negative profits for years, and as long as you don't run out of cash, the business can stay open. What consumes cash in a business are the expenses, and oftentimes, when businesses get into trouble, the lever they reach for is the growth lever, because the assumption is if I was just a little bigger, it would solve my profit or my cash problems. And that thinking is counter to every single business that you've ever read about in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Forbes, Fortune, Business Week. There's not one example of a company that got into trouble and the first thing they did is try to grow. When big companies get into trouble, the first thing they do is shrink. Always. That's true 100% of the time. And yet for most of us that are smaller and don't have that kind of experience, we don't focus, historically, have not focused as much on controlling the expenses, because to the extent that I have a limited amount of oxygen and I use that oxygen today, then I'm not on current expenses, then I'm not going to have that oxygen tomorrow. There's a great story that all of us heard about. I've forgotten when it was. It was several years ago, but it's a story of a Thailand soccer team that decided to explore a bunch of caves in Thailand. Oh, yeah. These were young boys, probably 14, 15 years old on this soccer team, and their soccer coach went with them to explore the caves. And on the way to the caves, they stopped off at a 7-Eleven or something, and they picked up, 4 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, whatever it was. So they get into the caves, and there's a huge rainstorm, and now the entrance to the caves is blocked with water, and so it became a huge international effort to save these young boys that were trapped in these caves. And literally, there was scuba divers and police and all, huge and international. After 15 days, they discovered they got to the boys and they got them out. And when they got the boys out, there were, I think, 13, 14 of these boys. When they got them out, there was still 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches left. In other words, they didn't know how long the bad times were going to last, and so they had to conserve their oxygen, their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and when they were discovered after 15 or 16 days, they still had food left. Mm-hmm. Well, that when we're in an economic situation like what we were in a year ago, and by the way, now that it's happened, it's going to happen again.
Yep.
Now that there's been such a thing as a lockdown, which there never was before, but now that it's happened, this will be a recurring theme. And there's another story I could tell you about that, but this will be a recurring theme. And so the key is, we need, as business owners, we need to be thoughtful about how much of our oxygen are we consuming for today's livelihood, and how much of that oxygen do we need to preserve, particularly when we don't know how long the crisis is going to last?
Well, and Keith, you said there, so one of my third point that I sent, and so I'll jump ahead to this one because I think it's so, if there's a lesson that I've seen a lot of people learn from this, and this was my third point, you said that the greatest risk going forward is the protocol that we use for this quarantine becomes how we handle all future situations. So, think about from a business owner standpoint, if they decide they're going to shut down the economy for 60 or 90 days in the future to handle these situations, how do you build a machine that can constantly survive those types of things? And I think if there's one thing that I saw, as we started talking to our advisors, we're like, hey, the one big controllable a lot of you have is marketing, marketing expenses, that you could cut some of that back and start really doing a good job of doing something that's really cheap, which is picking up the phone and calling people.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what was interesting about that, but it's what I'd love you to talk about is just like, hey, lessons you're seeing people learn is like people all of a sudden realize like, hey, by picking up the phone and calling people didn't cost us anything. And we generated a lot of business. A lot of people were worried. Prospective clients that maybe they missed on in the past that they've continued to drip on were coming in and wanting to sit down and talk to them. So any big lessons or takeaways you have from that of like, okay, if this becomes a protocol for how things are handled in the future, what do you've got to make sure that you do in your business to survive that?
I think one of the most common mistakes that business owners make, particularly business owners that don't have a board, one of the most common mistakes is they tend to think in terms only of offense. There's rarely the thinking about defense and safety nets and dry powder. And yet, when you look at who wins most Super Bowls, the last one is a great example. You got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Kansas City Chiefs, and the team with the best defense beat the team with the best offense. You look at the last NBA Finals, Milwaukee Bucks, Phoenix Suns. The team with the best defense beat the team with the best offense. In fact, if you go back for the last 30 years, in Super Bowls and NBA Finals, 95% of the time, you'll find the team with the best defense wins the game over and over and over again. So the idea is this. If you live on the south coast of Florida and you have a house that cannot withstand a hurricane, it's only a matter of time before you have no house. Because the hurricane eventually will happen. And we live in an economy and in a society in which there's a new kind of hurricane that we've never seen before, which is, okay, there's a health pandemic. Regardless of your politics, the world gets shut down for a period of time. I can't tell you the number of businesses that I work with who have what I call the miracle of the COVID. Their business is doing substantially better today than it was a year or 18 months ago, pre-pandemic, and that's largely a result of the internal changes, the structure they've made, the infrastructure that they've changed internally. They've tightened their belts. They are more thoughtful on how they spend money. They're picking up the phone for a change instead of relying on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, their financial results are actually better. Now, this isn't true for everybody.
Sure.
But it's true for a lot of people. And so my thought is real simple. If I was going to put it on a bumper sticker, I'd say, how you run your business during the good times dictates how well you survive the bad times.
That's
And
good.
what we ought to have is we ought to have a defense to go along with our offense so that we have more than just one lever in our cockpit when the bad times happen. And we know they're going to happen again. The dam has been broken. We'll have future lockdowns or future crises, and what we need to build is a house that can withstand a hurricane.
That was good. Now everyone can see why I wanted you on here. You're so good with these great lessons, and then a great way to understand them. Okay, let me hit you with another one that I shared with our team. You posed the question: how many of your current problems would go away tomorrow if every player on your team was an A player? And what you said, the other note I made is a crisis. And so some people may not have followed this advice. So the reason I'm asking these is they apply great during a crisis, but candidly, if you didn't apply these during the crisis, we're still not completely out of it, right? I mean, so there's still some things that you can do here. But you said a crisis gives you the opportunity to cut. You for sure want to cut the fat. That's never going to hurt you. You can cut a little muscle, which will slow your recovery, but never cut to the bone because that creates permanent damage. And you said the bone is the people on your team that are necessary to restart the engine. So that's maybe just, there's a whole direction you can go there with A players and hiring and having the right people on the team. But I'll just kind of toss that out and let you talk a little bit about why that was so important.
It's a lesson that I had to learn the hard way when I hit a major financial bump 35 years ago. And the lesson that I learned is the tougher the times, the better the people I need. When I got a wind at my back, I can sail along pretty good, even if I've got mediocre people. But if I hit bad times, if I hit turbulence, I need great people around me to work through the problems. Great people are people that I refer to as A players. A players have a couple of common characteristics. Number one, they have a high internal emotional need to succeed. A high internal emotional need to succeed. In other words, you don't have to beg them to do their job. I tell people all the time that work for me, look, you don't have to beg me for your paycheck. Why in the world do I have to beg you to do your job? For crying out loud, here it is. Here's the job. Here's the outcomes. Go do it. A players love to be measured. They love it. It's report card day is the favorite day of every A student that you went to high school with, or junior high, or college. I still remember some of them. They made A's every semester in every single course. A players love to be measured. A players need a scoreboard. They got to be able to see what the score is, and they love to win. So if you have A players on your team, meaning they have a high internal emotional need to succeed, they're good at their job, they produce results, they raise their hand and ask for coaching. I mean, you have an A player when you got a room full of people who are saying, what else can I do? What else can I learn? What could I be doing better? And B and C players, they hunker and they avert their eyes and they hope you don't call on them. But my experience is if all of us had A players and only A players on our team, the bulk of our problems that we currently have would disappear. Now we'd have other problems, but we wouldn't have the problems we currently got if we just could top grade our team. And there's a whole skill set around doing that, and it's another part of something I teach at a different place.